Hi, everybody. This is our book club presentation. Our book was The Latinization of U.S. Schools.
Oh,
So we just have a little introduction slide about our book. So our book was first published in 2011, and this book is written by Dr. Jason Irizarry and his students under Project Forte. And this book was 11 chapters, and each chapter was written by a different member of Project Forte, which made our book very interesting to read because we got different perspectives. And a lot of our authors shared many overlapping ideas and themes throughout their writing. And our book was divided into four parts, each focusing on a different topic, which you can pause and read below. And then off to the side, we just have a cover of our book and a picture of our author. So some important vocab from our text we have put on a slide. There was a lot of vocab, but we picked our top five. And then the one that we're really going to focus on is Latinization. And that is pretty much what our book is about and in the title of our book. So Latinization is the growing cultural, economic, and demographic influence of the Latino community on mainstream US society. So I'm Emma. I will be doing chapters 1 through 3. So chapter 1 was written by Uola, who was a graduate student. And the key takeaways from this chapter was pretty much about how the Latinos are a very prominent group in the US, and they're still being treated very unfairly in education, and the youth still continues to face a lot of intense discrimination in schools. And then a important quote that I pulled was about data of the Latino community. And when this book was written, the population was at 47 million, but now it is at 68 million. And then another important fact that I pulled was that the Latino population was not recognized or protected under Brown versus Board until 1973. And I found that to be very important. And then I found a connection from our spring textbook. Should immigrants be Americanized in the schools, or should the schools support immigrant cultures? So, chapter 2 was written by Ortiz, a high school student. And the takeaways from chapter 2 were pretty much about how teachers and educators still really have strong biases and stereotypes about the Latino community. And those stereotypes do come out from the teachers, and the students pick up on that. And then the Latino students see it and feel it, and then affects their own mindset on their achievement. And of course, there's still the mindset that people believe all Latinos are rude, disrespectful, and do not care about education. And this is something that educators need to realize and then in turn learn more about their students to make more culturally responsive efforts in their classrooms. And some important quotes that I pulled from our book were about if teachers believe you lack character to succeed, then they'll lower their expectations. And then I pulled a quote from our Mull et al. Article about how we all have fears, assumptions, and perhaps misunderstandings, which I really connected to this chapter because educators do really probably have fears and assumptions, and those ideas can come into our teaching, and that's what we have to realize. And then chapter 3 was by Medina, who another high school student. And from this chapter, I took away that Latino students are still struggling to fit into school while still keeping their identity. Teachers tend to focus on how students react to situations instead of wondering what could have provoked that reaction, and that educators need to be very mindful with their students and have meaningful conversations to support them, to learn about them, and to hopefully change the curriculum in a positive way that represents them more. And that and quotes that I pulled from our book was that teachers need to be willing to fight for what's right for students, to change the curriculum, and changing the curriculum to include stories of Latinos will make the classroom more culturally diverse. And then I pulled from Langston Billings that teachers can't shy away from conducting research about their practice. And what I synthesized from these three chapters is that the Latino population is still viewed as less than compared to most likely their white counterparts, and that teachers need to take their biases, reflect on them, and really understand that those negative ideas can translate into how they view and teach and treat their Latino students.
I'm Audrey, and I'm going to be sharing chapters 4 through 6. So, chapter 4 was written by Rodriguez, who argues that schools often value English and the Anglo-American culture. So, students of color are actually put at a disadvantage. This connects to Yasso's 2005 critical race theory, which questions why the white middle class culture is often viewed as a societal standard. Rodriguez reminds us that the world is heterogeneous and teachers should recognize students' cultural identities as strengths and build on their funds of knowledge, as emphasized by Mall et al., 1992. Beyond the text, teachers can affirm students' identities through activities like a paper ball activity, which helps students reflect on what characteristics and identities are important to them and make them who they are. Chapter 5 was written by Nieves, who explains that schools are unintentionally creating barriers by policing language and reinforcing one way of speaking as, quote, the correct way, unquote, as we also explored in spring 2018. Instead, teachers should value multilingualism and create classrooms where all languages are honored, which is an overarching theme in our text. This also aligns with Banks and Banks' 1995 concept of inequity pedagogy, where they encourage teachers to allow students to explore diverse perspectives, controversies, and real-world issues as they become democratic citizens. Beyond the text, teachers can welcome students as home languages through activities like a class mosaic, where students incorporate words from their own languages and cultures and share it with the whole class. And lastly, chapter 6 was written by Juarez, who highlights the unfair biases and treatment undocumented immigrants and students face in society and in school. He reminds readers that these people have the same dreams and goals as anyone else. So therefore, Juarez encourages teachers to integrate current events and immigrant perspectives within curriculum so it can strengthen teachers' instruction by building on families as funds of knowledge, as cited in Mall et al. 1992. Also, Juarez informs us that there have been huge developments in legislation like the DREAM Act, whose framework has inspired other executive and legislative actions and laws. Beyond the text, teachers can create opportunities for students to share their immigration or home stories through something called a culture corner. Teachers can also help students develop praxis as described by Freire 1970 and 2000, as cited in Irizarry, so they can also become informed societal citizens and make positive changes in the future.
Okay, so I'm Mackenzie Chapman. I'm here to talk to you about chapters 7, 8, and 9. Chapter 7 was written by Martinez, and the big theme in this chapter was that students should be using their home language in the classroom and not just using English. So if they speak Spanish, they should be using Spanish. They can use Spanglish. They can use Spanish and English. Um, in all of our readings, we kind of talked about how our students come in with important knowledge of their culture, their language, and all other things from all their experiences, and that needs to be seen in the classroom. So this chapter really relates to Mall et al. And Ladson and Billings. And I'm gonna head to chapter 8, which was written by Vargas. Um, Vargas discusses the downside to academic tracking, which in academic tracking, you'll see a large population of Latino students in the lower level classes, so we're limiting their opportunities and we're lowering expectations for them and they're meeting the low expectations, but they're not reaching their highest potential. So this relates to Banks and Banks, 1995. That relates to equity pedagogy, so making sure everything's equitable for our students. So if our students are continually placed into lower level courses based on biased data, such as standardized test scores, our students will not reach their full potential, and tracking students is not equitable. Next one. Chapter 9 was written by Montañez. And this one, it was really talking about the school to prison pipeline and how there's an overrepresentation of Latino students in prisons and in school suspensions and expulsions. And that relates back to Emma's idea and bias about how people believe Latinos are poorly behaved or they are rude, they are disrespectful, they don't want to learn. And in reality, that's not the case. This chapter was kind of not necessarily a standalone chapter, but there were a lot of different relations within the chapter and a lot of different sources. Um, so it's just something to keep in mind that there's an overrepresentation of Latinos in prisons and in school suspensions.
I'm Jada. I'll be doing chapter 10 through the epilogue. Chapter 10 was written by Acosta, who offers a different perspective to the idea that teachers lower expectations. So Acosta actually argues that a lot of teachers assume that Latinos students lack parental involvement due to apathy. which is problematic not only because it ignores the investment many families have in education, but it can also reinforce cycles of poverty, where limited educational support reduces further economic opportunity. Costa also stresses that the battle for more Latino advocacy has been ongoing. This is also explored in our course text, Spring 2018, which argues that schooling has often been structured in ways that maintain existing power dynamics, which is also explored by Banks in 1995. So it often limits the voices of marginalized groups. This raises a key question about who defines equity in our education system. Chapter 11, written by LeDuc, offers the only non-Latino teacher perspective out of the whole book. In this chapter, LeDuc explores the importance of teachers making a conscious effort to immerse themselves in the cultures held by their students. In doing so, teachers challenge the traditional power dynamics identified by Banks in 1995. LeDuc calls for a structural reevaluation of the education system, specifically to reflect the growing Latinization of America. As Spring 2018 notes, the shifting demographics of America have historically demanded a shift in the way policymakers and educators approach education. According to LeDuc, the best source of knowledge for how to foster an equity pedagogy is the students themselves, aligning with Mall et al.'s 1992's Funds of Knowledge thesis. Lastly, we have our epilogue, which explores the youth action participatory research and really just this idea that students should be empowered to contribute to their own learning experience. And one thing that we hope you take away from our presentation is that you will try to find more opportunities for students to take agency over their learning. And these are our references. Thank you.